I don't know how to keep him home. He's on a cruise this week. I wish I could afford cruises every other week or so there. And so if you want to turn to Daniel, the 6th chapter, we'll read about Daniel in the lion's den. It says, it pleased Darius to appoint 120 satraps to rule throughout the kingdom, with 3 administrators over them, of whom was himself among the administrators and the satraps by his exceptional qualities, that the king planned to set him over the whole kingdom. At this, the administrators and the satraps tried to find grounds for charges against Daniel, but they were unable to do so. And of course, if you're teaching a kids class, you're embellishing all of that about how good Daniel was and how good a man he was and how these guys didn't like him at all and all that kind of stuff. And so they could find no corruption in him because he was trustworthy and neither corrupt nor negligent. Finally, these men said, we will never find any basis for charges against the man Daniel unless it has something to do with the law of his God. So these administrators and satraps went as a group to the king and said, may King Darius live forever. The royal administrators, prefects, satraps, advisors, and governors have all agreed that the king should issue an edict praise to any god except to you, your majesty, shall be thrown into the lion's den. Now, your majesty, issue this decree and put it into writing so that it cannot be altered. Medes and Persians, which cannot be repealed. So King Darius put the decree in writing. And that was the custom in those days, that there was no way to change it. So when Daniel learned that the decree had been published, he went home to his upstairs room where the windows opened toward Jerusalem. 3 times a day he got down on his knees and prayed, giving thanks to his God, just as he had done before. Then these men went as a group and found Daniel praying and asking God for help. So they went to the king and spoke to him about his royal decree. Did you not publish a decree that during the next 30 days, anyone who prays to any god or human being except to you, your majesty, would be thrown into the lion's den? And the king answered, the decree stands in accordance with the law of the Medes and Persians, which cannot be repealed. Then they said to the king, Daniel, who is one of the exiles from Judah, pays no attention to you, your majesty, or to the decree you put in writing. He still prays 3 times a day. And when the king heard this, he was greatly distressed. He was determined to rescue Daniel and made every effort until sundown to save him. Then the men went as a group to the law of the Medes and Persians. No decree or edict that the king issues can be changed. So the king gave the order, and they brought Daniel and threw him into the lion's den. The king said to Daniel, may your God, whom you serve continually, rescue you. And a stone was brought and placed over the mouth of the den, and the king sealed it with his own signet ring and with the rings of his nobles, so that Daniel's situation might not be changed. Then the king returned to his palace and spent the night without eating and without any entertainment being brought to him, and he could not sleep. At the first light of dawn, the king got up and hurried to the lion's den. When he came near the den, he called to Daniel in an anguished voice, Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God, whom you serve continually, been able to rescue you from the lions? And Daniel answered, because I was found innocent in his sight, nor have I ever done any wrong before you, your majesty. The king was overjoyed and gave orders to lift Daniel out of the den. And when Daniel was lifted from the den, no wound was found on him because he had trusted in God. So that's basically the story that we tell to our little kids. So what I want to do is ask a few questions about the story that we don't tell to the little kids. And one was, why do you think King Nebuchadnezzar picked some of the Israelites to be some of the rulers in his kingdom. What would be a reason for that? Jesse? Now, you're going to have to speak up, because I'm a little hard of hearing. Oh, okay. Right. Okay. And that's true. They were. They didn't want to eat the king's food, and they didn't, and so they became more healthy. And Ron?
I know we don't agree with their religious beliefs, but when we were touring Alaska, we found out that the Princess Cruises during the summer will hire college students from Brigham Young University because they're more dependable, more trustworthy, and have good morals.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's probably the same reason that the Pharaoh hired, brought in Joseph. And a belief in God gives you more morals and more responsibility than people don't.
Okay, and that's true. You do want people surrounding you that are honorable and trustworthy. But there's another reason, too. If you bring people in from your enemy's side and learn about them and put them in positions of trust, then you have a little more control over those who you've captured. And that's what I think that Nebuchadnezzar did. At least one reason that he did it was so he could control the Israelites by using people from their own country. There was a Chinese general one time, long before Nebuchadnezzar, though, and his name was no, it wasn't, not Sun. I looked that up. Soon is the way it's spelled S-U-N, but it's pronounced S-O-O-N. Sun Tzu was his name. And he said, know your enemies and know yourself, and in 100 battles you will never be in peril. Don't, both your chances of winning or losing are equal. So Nebuchadnezzar, I think, put them in power, the four of them, for a very good reason, because he learned about their customs. And I think some of our generals, we need to know our enemies and we can win the battle. And don't you think that's true even today? I think we ought to know who we're fighting. And if we don't, they're going to pull something on us that we're not familiar with, and maybe to even defeat us. If you ever played in athletic events or anything, Brian was an old coach, so he knows about this. You know who you're playing, don't you? You study them, their traits, and what they do, and that way you can defeat the enemy as such. And I think we can carry that over even into our spiritual lives to defeat him. Many of you know your own weaknesses. Have you ever just kind of sat down and thought about yourself and the weaknesses that you have? He knows my weaknesses probably better than I know them, because that's where he hits me, is where I'm the weakest. So if I haven't sat down and thought about myself and my weaknesses, then that's where the devil's going to hit me. And he does that pretty often. He's a pretty smart guy. But that's one thing that I think that we don't tell the kids about in this story, is why Daniel and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were in the positions that they were in. It's because he wanted control over them, and if he knew them, then he knew how to control them. So he chose, as we said, Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego to be trained for his service. And like Jesse was saying a while ago, he was going to give them the best. Have we ever turned down something that would be good for us, but we didn't want it because we thought we had something better? And I'm talking about maybe in a spiritual way. Have you ever had somebody come to you and give you some situation or something that didn't seem to fit just right with the Bible, and you'd say, no, I think I've got something better. I've got the Bible for my information. Well, that's what the four of them did. And sure enough, eating vegetables and water. Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't see you, Deanne. I cannot hear you at all. Okay, somebody repeat that to me. What did she say? Okay.
Because of their royal statue, they were already educated.
Oh, okay.
But if you read Daniel 1:17, it said, these four young men God gave knowledge and understanding of all kind of literature and learning.
Mm-hmm.
And Daniel could understand visions and dreams of all kinds.
Right.
God, I guess, put them in place.
Yeah, and why did God put them in place? Because he knew that they were trustworthy, and he knew their character. I don't know if he could have picked other people from Israel or not, but he did pick these four, we know that. And at the end of the period of time, 10 days, I think it was, they looked better and were in better shape. Their skin was in better shape. Everything was better because they did something different from what the king wanted them to do. And so, before the lion's den, we'll talk about them next week. I think I have to teach next week too, because Chuck will still be gone, naturally. So we'll talk about Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego next week. But now then, we come on over into some dreams that the kings had. Nebuchadnezzar had a dream that was interpreted for him. And then Belshazzar, the follower of Nebuchadnezzar, had a dream, and Daniel interpreted it. And so Belshazzar, the king, kind of lifted Daniel up. It says in chapter 5, verse 29, he put him in purple, and gold chain was placed around his neck, and he was proclaimed the third highest in the kingdom. So Daniel had gone up in ranks. But that very night, it says, Belshazzar, king of the Babylonians, was slain, and Darius the Mede took over the kingdom at the age of 62. And that's where the story of Daniel in the lion's den starts, is after Belshazzar was king, Darius was made king, and then he's the one that captured the lions, and they brought them in for sport, actually. And they would dig dens for the lions and put them in there. And then it's even said that one of the kings used to let the lions out so that he could go and hunt them. And I thought that was kind of interesting. But did you know that there's no evidence that there were any lions' dens in Babylon? That's kind of an interesting fact, I thought. Instead, they had to dig them because in researching this, I found out that the caves that they threw the lions into actually, because the water table was so high that very little digging was required before they hit water. So they couldn't dig a real deep one. The lions down into the den. And the lions down into the den. And they would starve them to death, or before they would have battles and things like that, before they let them out to go hunt them. And so that means that the place where the lions were kept must have been constructed specifically for the purpose, and they were most likely made out of some kind of stone or brick, and they'd throw them in there. And it says they threw them down into the den, so they were probably a big room sort of thing, and they would put a hole in the top of it. And I guess that would be natural so that the lions couldn't get out of it. And so they threw lions down in there. And then when they got ready to go and do their whatever they were going to do, hunting or throwing people down in there, then they would somehow get the lions out of that den. So we see that it was for lion's den because there weren't very many dens around. And I guess this one through Daniel. Now Daniel went down into the lion's den, delves into the study of the Word, and we do what we're supposed to do, then we can be confident, just like Daniel was, that he wasn't going to be hurt. And I think that's a good lesson for us. We need to study every day so that we know who our enemy is, the devil, and fall, and that we make mistakes. But God is going to take care of us, and He always has, and He always will. Now then, so we see that in everything that happened with Daniel and the other three men was not a natural situation. It wasn't natural for men to be tossed into a lion's den. It wasn't natural for them to be tossed into a fiery furnace. But we do see that one convinced the king to throw him into the lion's den. That's right. He threw them right in there, didn't he? And it says even before they got to the bottom, the lions were tearing them apart. And that's another thing too. When the devil does something, he does it completely, and so does God. He threw not only the governors and satraps, and he threw their whole family in there. And I think that's a warning to us. We can drag our families down just like those men drug their families down with them by being thrown into the lion's den. And so that's an interesting story that was told to story for them. And I'm not going to scare them with anything by telling them they're going to be thrown into the lion's den if they don't behave, even though there are a few kids that I think I could use that on maybe. Maybe some of my own. But I think it's a neat story. And I think what we need to get out of the story of the lion's den is that we need to know our enemy, who is the devil. We need to study so that we can defeat the devil, just like Daniel did. And this is another thing I didn't say a while ago, but what did Daniel do the first thing he did when he heard the decree of the king? He went and prayed to God, didn't he? That's the very first thing he did. And 3 times a day he prayed. And I think that's a good lesson for us too, is when we're confronted with something, what should we do? Very first thing, pray and ask him for his help. Your Bible, pray to God first thing, and he'll take care of you. Okay, anybody got any comments on this story, that decree that everyone should worship the real God? And I guess that's the way the gospel spreads. We do something like Daniel did, and someone sees that. I've got just a little bit more. Did you know that there are actually 2 more chapters in Daniel? Truly. There's Daniel 13 and 14, if you didn't know that. You won't find it in your Bible, but it's in the Catholic Bible. And they're really interesting stories about Joachim in Daniel, beautiful God-fearing woman named Susanna. And they lusted so much that they wanted to be with her, and she wouldn't let them. And so, anyway, the story goes, and I don't even know how to tell the story really without all the stuff that goes with it. But anyway, the elders hid in her garden and waited for her to come in there. And then they confronted her and said, they wanted to do what they shouldn't do with her. And fall into your power, talking to the men, then to sin before the Lord. And so Susanna was an honorable woman. And she ran out of the room. And when the old men were accused of it, they put to death. The two men were. Now that's in the Catholic Bible, and it's always been there, but it's never been brought into the Bible that we know. Our Bibles stop with chapter 12, and then in chapter 14. There's another interesting story, and I can read this one to you because it's not quite so explicit. And it says, Daniel was a companion of the king and was held in high honor more than any of the other friends of the king. And the Babylonians they had an idol called, in this version it says Baal, but some of them is Baal, B-A-A-L. This is B-E-L. And when the king asked Daniel, why do you not worship Baal? He said, because I do not revere idols made with hands, but only the living God who made heaven and earth. And the king said, you do not think Baal is a living God? Do you not see how much he eats and drinks every day? Well, what the king had done was leave food out for the idol every night. And every night it would be gone. And the king says, see, Baal's coming in here and eating and drinking and having a good time. And Daniel said, well, okay, but I'm telling you, they don't do it. The Baal isn't the one that does it. And so the king went to Daniel, and he said, or Daniel said to the king, go ahead and set some food out, and then shut the door and seal it. And he said, if you do not find that Baal is eating it when you return in the morning, we will die. He's talking about him and his friends. And otherwise, Daniel said, if the food is gone and I can prove to you that Baal didn't eat it, then whoever did eat it will die. So the king did that. He thought that was a great idea. And so they departed, and the king set the food out, and Daniel ordered his servants, this is how smart Daniel was, to put ashes all over the floor inside of the... So the priests that were doing it had a sin, and then the king would think that Baal ate it. And so they did that night. And so the priest entered that night as usual with their wives and children. They ate and drank everything. And early the next morning, arrested the priests, their wives and their children, and they showed him the secret door by which they used to enter to consume what was on the table. And the king put them to death and handed Baal over to Daniel, who destroyed it in the temple. And it goes on to say, there was a great dragon which the Babylonians revered, and the king said to Daniel, you can't deny that this is a living God, so worship it. But Daniel answered him, I worship the Lord my God, for he is the living God. And he said, give me permission, and I will kill this dragon without a sword or about Daniel. And so Daniel took some pitch, fat, and hair, boiled them all together and made it into cakes. And when he put it into the mouth of the dragon burst. And this, he said to the king, is what you revere. And so when the Babylonians heard that their Baal was killed, the dragon was killed, then the king again, like Jeff said a while ago, demanded that the people that did all that be killed and that Daniel would be lifted up. So I thought that was some interesting points about Daniel that we don't read about in our scripture, but they are real, not holy scriptures, but they're real stories that were written a long time ago, about the same time the rest of Daniel was written. So if you've never heard that story, then go home and look it up, and you can read both of those. That's Daniel 13 and 14 in the Catholic Bible. And I know I'm a little bit early, but I think what I want to leave you with is, when you're in trouble, then work on those. Sometimes I think that we pray, do what I want to do. And I think we're that same way. But if we'll consider our own problems and consider ourselves and study every day, pray every day, and let God do the work, God will be glorified because of what we do. We've got just a few minutes left, but that's really all I have this morning. Next week we'll study about